Hey everybody, welcome back to another case study with your host, me. If you're new to the channel, be sure to start with part 1 of this series, where we go over what character development is, including how it differs from character growth, as well as the core factors of a character's development and ways it can be integrated into our writing. If you're all caught up, it's time to get practical and look at some examples of character developments to see the effectiveness of their presentation and impact and how growth can build off of development. Let's get into it. This time around, we're doing things a bit different. Instead of looking at one character to see how well or poorly their development was handled, I've decided to look at 2. And I thought it would be interesting to examine characters that share a lot of similarities but are from different stories. That way, there's a bit of variety in the examples, and it allows for some comparison between the execution of presentation and impact. Both characters I chose are female and of similar age, teenagers. Both their stories have them living through / participating in a large-scale war in a fantasy setting. Both have extraordinary abilities. Both are presented in animated series targeted to young viewers. Both appear in roughly the same amount of episodes, around 60. And both are considered to be main / point of view characters in their series. The thumbnail has already given it away, so I may as well just tell you, it's Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender and Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars: The Clone Wars. There will be spoilers for both those series, just so you know. And in an effort to present the girls on equal footing, I will be taking into account the narrative presentation and fan interpretations for both characters, as opposed to our usual examinations of Ahsoka, which set those aspects aside. Let's look at their extra development first. If you recall from part 1, extra developments are details that are not inherently essential to a character. Rather, they are vehicles that help convey or explain a character's core aspects. So things such as hobbies, backstory, relationships, likes and dislikes, etc. And to be upfront, due to the fact that I was trying to keep this exercise and thus video runtime a reasonable length, I limited this section to just 3 examples for each character, and I'm only including explicitly presented development. But if you have more examples, feel free to share them and dissect them in the comments. That being said, this script has undergone a ton of revisions. So for those of you who are interested, there are more examples for this and other sections which ended up getting cut, but will be available exclusively for our patrons. Alright, for each example of extra development, we're going to be looking at how, when, and why it is presented, and what impact it has on the character and or their story. We'll begin with Katara. Right at the beginning of the series, we find out about a very meaningful past relationship, Katara's mother. Yes, I know it's been memed to death, but in my opinion, it doesn't deserve all the hate. And regardless, it's still a prime example of extra character development. So, in episode 1, we learn that their mother is dead when Katara loses her cool at Sokka.
Ever since Mom died, I've been doing all the work around camp while you've been off playing soldier!
Note that she's not just reminding him of their mother's death, but rather venting about how the combination of Mom's absence and his male chauvinism have left her feeling overwhelmed and frustrated. This info is dropped very early, which helps to inform Katara's motherly nature and thus why she so quickly takes Aang under her wing. Just 2 episodes later, we learn about how their mother died when Katara attempts to prepare Aang for what they may find at the Air Temple.
The Fire Nation is ruthless. They killed my mother. They could have done the same to your people.
This revelation solidly underlines her attitude toward the Fire Nation. They have harmed her and her community to such an extent that she believes they are able and willing to commit any atrocity, including genocide. And with that mentality, especially when that educated suspicion is confirmed, there is no question as to why she's so eager to see them stopped. So these 2 simple developments, dead mother, killed by Fire Nation, explain aspects of Katara's personality and motivations. They help us understand her maturity and motherliness, her compassion for the oppressed, and her hatred for the Fire Nation. But her attitude toward the Fire Nation is tested over the course course of the series as she experiences the nuances of war firsthand, seeing good guys and bad guys and victims on both sides. And near the end of season 3, Katara at last finds some closure regarding her mother's murder, and from it stems the willingness to forgive Zuko, a representative of the nation she has hated, and we see moving forward that she genuinely accepts him as a friend. I bring this up to note that the development regarding her mother's murder is not only a significant factor in who Katara is and part of what drives her, but it also prompts one of her areas of growth. So the impact it has on her story, and how we view it is downright beautiful. On that note, I ran across an interesting Tumblr post that talks about Katara's relationship with her mother's memory, and how it adds a bit of a theme of bonding and trust to Katara's character arc. We'll put it in the description below so you can check it out too if you want. For now, there's one more example I want to share.
Should I eat a mango or a papaya for breakfast tomorrow? Papaya. Oh, I hate papaya.
We learn about a food she dislikes. However, what makes this example interesting isn't the aversion itself, but how it is used to emphasize the foolish extent to which Katara has gotten caught up with Aunt Wu's predictions, particularly because it's implied that there is nothing special behind that choice. Aunt Wu just picked a random option because she was frustrated with Katara's obsession, and we see it takes an imminent volcano eruption to shake her out of her belief, which is in perfect alignment with her characteristic stubbornness, but that's nothing new. Ultimately, the inclusion of this development works well within the story of that episode, but otherwise, her opinion of papayas is irrelevant. It never affects or informs prior or later behavior. And since this is in a self-contained filler episode, even the broader context of the moment makes little, if any, impact on her overall character journey or how the audience views her, which, in a way, is a good thing. If the extra development here had been that Katara has a severe food allergy, one might expect that to be of some importance elsewhere in the story. It's the kind of thing Azula would probably find out and use to strike at the team. But by keeping the area of effect, if you will, of this development small, there's no damage done to the character or story when it's never revisited. Anyway, to sum up, Katara has some really great and some rather insignificant character development, but both are handled well. Next, we'll look at Ahsoka. Unlike with Avatar, TCW does not have an overarching narrative. It's an anthology, but there is still a timeline. The creators had a beginning and an endpoint in mind. And it's clear that Ahsoka's character is intended to develop and grow over the course of the series. And keep in mind that her episodes are almost entirely in chronological order. So what are some examples of when and how the writers utilized extra development to affect her character and/or story? Well, in her last episode of season 1, episode 19, Storm over Ryloth, we learn,
This is my first time commanding a squadron, R7.
The first thing to note is she just outright states this without any prompting, and then the writers immediately have Anakin state it again.
This is it, your first command.
But it's implied over the rest of the scene that she's feeling nervous and just trying to cover it up.
Of course I'm not nervous.
Don't be nervous.
I wish everyone would stop saying that.
So this development is clearly intended to explain why she's feeling nervous. But ultimately the development is completely inconsequential. As soon as she takes off, her nervousness disappears, replaced by more characteristic behavior.
Are you ready for some action?
And her failure later in the episode is not attributed to either inexperience or nervousness. Rather, in her conversation with Anakin, he correctly attributes it to her being short-sighted and insubordinate, and she tries to deflect it onto him.
There's a bigger picture that you're not aware of. First rule of war, listen and obey your superiors.
But sometimes you get carried away.
And here's another problem. This isn't even really her first time in command. We already saw her leading troops, giving orders, being addressed as Sir in episode 7, Duel of the Droids.
Follow me, boys!
Those droids are getting close, sir. I can always hotwire him, sir. But, sir...
That's an order, Rex.
So it's not like something changes here in her interactions with the clones or in her relationship to them moving forward. Which means that neither the fact that this battle was supposedly her first time in command, nor the context of her implied nervousness have any impact on her character journey or even the story of this episode. The next example is from her first episode of season 3, episode 4, Sphere of Influence.
Master, if the Jedi can't officially get involved, let me do this on my own.
Senator Chuchi is a good friend of mine.
The reason for the timing of this reveal is obvious. The information is supposed to explain Ahsoka's motivation for wanting to help look for the chairman's daughters. But what is there to support this claim of good friendship with Chuchi? We never see them together outside of that episode, and even within the episode, their friendship seems questionable. Ahsoka straight up lies to Chuchi more than once for no reason.
Chuchi, Senator Amidala sent me to help if I can.
Have you done this before?
No.
Can't you sense where they are? Isn't that something you Jedi can do?
It's not something I can just turn on or off.
So at best, this development is effectively used to get Ahsoka into the plot, since without that motivation, she would have no reason to participate in the story. But the information, the relationship itself, inherently has a broader area of effect. Who we are impacts who we become friends with, and who we become friends with influences who we are. But Ahsoka's good friendship has no effect on her character or story outside of this episode. We see this lack most obviously in Season 7 when Ahsoka shows zero concern for the fact that the residents of Coruscant, including Chuchi, are endangered by the Separatist attack.
Right now, people on Coruscant need us.
No. The Chancellor needs you.
Which means, at worst, even within the episode, the development works against her character by having her claims of good friendship feel false. The last example I've decided to share is from 3 episodes later, though chronologically it comes just before. In Season 3, Episode 7, Assassin, Ahsoka muses aloud,
I've never been to Baelith.
because she thinks she'll be joining Anakin there on his next mission. But it doesn't go anywhere because she's immediately informed that she won't actually be going. At most, we later see that her disappointment in not being able to go stems from her desire for action rather than any interest in a new travel destination.
I should be out there fighting, not in here studying.
But that attitude adds nothing new to her characterization. So again, neither the information itself nor the broader context of how it fits in the episode do anything to impact Ahsoka's character or story. Though on the plus side, that also means it doesn't do any damage. But yeah, those examples show rather abysmal development. At best, they give explanation for the immediate context, but they give nothing beyond that. And at worst, they detract from Ahsoka's character and/or story. But as I said before, these examples are limited. So if you know of other examples of extra development, stuff that's not immediately linked to the core of the character, whether explicitly or implicitly presented, feel free to share and dissect them in the comments, for Ahsoka or Katara. In the meantime, let's move on to core developments to see the different approaches taken for each girl and how well the execution was handled. As I said in part 1, I believe appearance, personality, abilities, and motivations to be a character's core developments. And I find that most of what you need to know for these aspects is front-loaded in the first act of a story to help establish the character before their character arc kicks into gear and these aspects start changing. That's not to say you can never wait until later in a story to reveal more about a character's core. But it's more so a general rule of thumb that if your audience still doesn't have a firm grasp on who your character is, what they can do, and why they are involved before everything else gets rolling, you may have a bit of a problem with keeping your audience invested in the character at all, let alone the journey they are on. Anyway, let's start by looking at appearance. As both Katara and Ahsoka are from visual media, the reality is that their appearance is the first development revealed to the audience. And it means that to examine the effectiveness of that development, we need to understand a little about character design. Being a hobby artist, I've already done some research into this kind of thing, and I think the fastest and simplest explanation would be that effective character design should immediately give the viewer knowledge or at least an impression of the following. 1. The character's environment. Not just their climate or whether it's urban versus wilderness living, but also the general setting. Medieval fantasy, sci-fi future, real world, etc. 2. Their occupation and/or lifestyle, which can inform their body type too. And 3. Their personality, which is informed by their background, their role in the story, and their temperament. Shape language also plays a part in how the audience will read a character, but I'm not going to go too deeply into that. The image on screen sums up the basic idea. In a nutshell, character design gives you an idea of where the character is, what they do, and who they are. And often, as a character changes over the course of a story, their design will change as well to implicitly reflect that, which is another way that development and growth can overlap. So with all that in mind, what do we see when we look at Katara's main character design? We can see she lives in a cold climate, thick furry coat, dressed in layers, though in terms of setting, not much is distinct. Other than the art stylization, this character could be set in a more realistic story. Aside from that, her design is feminine, as well as soft and flowy with mostly cool, calming blues, which of course marks her as a Water Tribe member, but also reinforces that maternal aspect of her character. Her face is rounded, giving her a safe and friendly look. Her build is slender, but the thick, loose layers of her clothing add a sense of solidity to her frame. And we can see that her outfit offers freedom of movement, and her hair is tied back, showing that she's a practical person. And appropriately, over the course of the series, her design changes several times, even on small occasions, to match a change in the setting environment or what she's doing in it. Overall, a decent design that fulfills the necessary criteria. What does Ahsoka's character design tell us? Given her alien features and laser sword, it's immediately apparent that she's from a galaxy far, far away, a space fantasy setting with significantly advanced technology. Her design is predominantly angular, sharp, with warm, energetic oranges, suggesting danger and intensity. The lightsaber identifies her as a Jedi, but her outfit gives the impression of a mall rat in a warm climate. And the tightness of the clothing accentuates her stick-thin build, making her look almost unhealthy, giving the impression of a weak or inactive character. Now, certainly some of her design effectively conveys aspects of her character, mainly her personality, but other aspects leave me confused. Except for the lightsaber, there's really nothing about her design to inform her occupation as a Jedi fighting on the front lines of a war. Her build is fragile, and she's dressed in a tube top and a miniskirt over leggings. Like I said, she looks ready to casually hang out at the mall with friends, not fight a battle as a member of a strict philosophical peacekeeping organization. And to be clear, I'm not expecting a full suit of armor here. Take Master Adigalia as a counterexample. Her loose layers give coverage that offers a sense of protection while still allowing freedom of movement. Or at the very least, consider Ahsoka's outfit from the beginning of Tales of the Jedi Episode 5. That looks way better. But no, we got this. And there's no in-universe explanation for why Ahsoka chooses to dress that way. The general audience infers that it's due to her being immature, like a spoiled real-life teenager. But the Jedi way of life is not one of indulgence, so that explanation doesn't really add up, thus leaving us with this strange disparity between what her design tells us about who she is versus where she is and what she does. Certainly, there are occasions where Ahsoka's outfit changes to fit special circumstances, but the only other design she spends a significant amount of time in is the one she receives midway through Season 3, which is about halfway through her series appearances. Again, there's no in-universe explanation for this change, she's just suddenly different. Out of universe, Filoni explains that the change to her design was done to reflect a change in her maturity level, and from a purely visual perspective, it accomplishes that. She looks older and she's got slightly more coverage. Her bright colors are tamed down to more earthy hues, all lending to a sense of more maturity. However, it doesn't do much to make her appear more Jedi-like or better geared for battle. Her clothes are still skin tight and revealing, more indicative of a fashion statement than combat readiness. Thus, it's not much of an improvement in terms of reconciling her wardrobe with her occupation. And for those who want to bring up Master Aayla Secura, while I appreciate that she at least has an official, in-universe, character-based explanation for dressing the way she does, I can't deny that it would likely, rightfully, get a stab me now rating in one of Jill Barrett's armor tier lists. So while the creators do utilize Ahsoka's design to imply character growth, it seems that her main two outfits were chosen not based on how well they communicated information about her character, but rather based on how appealing or relatable it made her seem to the target audience. The final thing I want to talk about in regard to Ahsoka's design is her face markings. While most of the pattern adds visual interest, unfortunately, right above her eyes, it looks like they gave her permanently angry eyebrows. In many ways, it limits, if not sabotages, her expressiveness. Her upset expressions are pushed even more negative. Her neutral expression leans toward upset, and even smiling, she ends up looking impish rather than happy. It reinforces the impression of aggression and immaturity, even when she's supposed to have grown out of those traits. Not to mention a serious case of resting beach face does not make a character seem very friendly or caring. But I'll talk more about that later. For now, let's move on to abilities. As we discussed in part 1, characters have innate or learned abilities which fall into major and minor subcategories. Those that impact the narrative and or get a lot of attention, and those that do not. The best way to communicate to the audience what the character can do is to simply show them using their abilities. Next to establishing what a character can do, the most important aspect is establishing how well they can do it, including their limits and weaknesses, followed in importance by an explanation for how they can do it at all, which can be done implicitly or explicitly. Lastly, once you've established the character's abilities, it's essential that any changes you make are due to a logical progression or regression that is shown to the audience. Alright, now let's look at how Katara and Ahsoka's abilities are developed and how that development is utilized. With Katara, her minor abilities are mainly implicitly presented and explained. Given how she filled her mother's shoes from such a young age, it's no surprise that she has many domestic skills which she uses to support and care for her friends and allies. Throughout the series, these contributions are subtly present and believable enough that we can take it for granted that this group of kids survives so well throughout their travels, making it a smart inclusion even though it mostly fades into the background. But I want to note how in Season 2, Episode 12, Katara helps deliver a baby, a skill that's a rather sudden and convenient revelation, and one that the audience wouldn't necessarily expect her to have, which makes it a good example of what I mentioned in part 1. When the origin of a skill is not readily apparent, it's good to have a clear explanation for it. And the show does a great job of explaining how she has that experience in a very succinct way, with Sokka adding comedic value to keep the expository moment from feeling like exposition.
I helped Gran deliver lots of babies back home.
This isn't the same as delivering an Arctic seal! This is a real human thing!
It's called a baby, and I helped her deliver plenty of those too.
Given that her knowledge and experience in this area doesn't ever come up otherwise and doesn't really impact the broader story, even though it's essential in this episode, it still only counts as a minor ability. For her major ability, the skill that does get narrative focus, it's obviously her waterbending. Having been born into the Water Tribe, the explanation behind this development is, again, both logical and implicit. Her ability to waterbend is established almost right off the bat in Episode 1.
Sokka! I caught one!
And given the timing for its reveal, this development actually pulls double duty. One, it immediately begins introducing details for the magic system of the setting, what it can look like, what it's called,
It's water bending.
whether everyone can do it or not, how people think of it, etc. And two, it establishes Katara's conscious skill level with it, her personal baseline, creating a starting point for her ability growth arc. At this point, she has to focus just to catch a fish, and she's quite excited about accomplishing that. But a minute later, we are given more development, a taste of her potential, which sets the arc fully in motion. Over the course of the series, Katara struggles to master her waterbending. She starts out as self-taught, with little understanding of her abilities.
You mean I did that?
She learns through trial and error, training with Aang, and studying a scroll.
It took me 2 months to learn that move.
Well, you had to figure it out all on your own.
I just want to try this one move first, and then it's all yours.
As well as discovering other skills through the new problems she's facing. At the end of Season 1, she learns more about healing techniques during her stay at the North Pole. And upon her insistence to learn more offensive techniques, she gets soundly defeated in a duel with an experienced master. But then her combat skills improve dramatically after some time being taught by him.
You've advanced more quickly than any student I've ever trained. You have proven that with fierce determination, passion, and hard work, you can accomplish anything.
But even still, she has more to discover about waterbending, coming into contact with the swamp dwellers in Season 2, seeing plant bending, and then in Season 3 realizing she can use her own sweat, as well as being trained by the bloodbender. We see her making an effort to learn and practice more. She struggles and fumbles, then trains and later succeeds. And by the time the series ends, she has earned her status as a master in her own right, with offensive and defensive capabilities as well as healing and bloodbending under her belt. She starts off struggling against foot soldiers.
Katara!
And ends up defeating the prodigy princess herself. On its own, her ability to waterbend is a solid core development. Having it prompt a well-executed growth arc gives it incredible impact on the character and her story. How are Ahsoka's abilities handled? Her major abilities are the Jedi standard, using the Force, as well as hand-to-hand and lightsaber combat. She also has some minor piloting, mechanical, and linguistic aptitude. Now, with her minor abilities, her mechanical and piloting skills can reasonably be assumed to be part of her learning as a Jedi in war, especially with Anakin as her master, so no issue there. But her ability to speak Wookiee is a bit of a conundrum. To my knowledge, it's not part of standard Jedi learning, and Anakin doesn't speak it. But she seems fluent, easily interpreting for Chewbacca during the Season 3 Padawan Lost arc, with no explanation behind how she has that skill. With her major abilities, well, there's a couple issues. As I said in part 1, for the audience to get a proper sense of the character's abilities, you need to establish what the character can do and how well they can do it. Most often, development of a character's combat skills is implicitly presented during fight scenes, whether they be controlled duels or actual combat. And assuming we, the audience, know or can infer the skill level of the character's opponents, we can see how the character compares to the broader baseline of the setting. But with Ahsoka, that proves to be difficult. First, because there's a lack of consistency. What she's capable of is often changing without due consideration of factors such as a lack or progression of skill, whether she's facing opponents who would logically be within or beyond her league, or even whether she or the antagonist are weakened. As a few of the clearest examples, in Season 1, Episode 17, Ahsoka has to call a retreat due to the opposition of a few droidicas.
I can't hold them!
But in the next episode, when she's weakened by the deadly blue shadow virus and she has less support behind her, she dispatches a few droidicas with ease. In Season 2, Episode 2, Ahsoka fights Bane and easily bests him, even though he was armed and she wasn't. But in the very next episode, now he is unarmed and injured, but she goes down immediately and stays down. In Season 3, Episode 21, Ahsoka faces a Trandoshan hunter and has to be rescued from defeat. But then in the next episode, after she suffered a few days of deprivation, she takes on the Trandoshan leader, who is stronger than the other as well as better armed, and she beats him.
You're beaten.
The problem with this inconsistency is that we can't really see what her skill level actually is, let alone how good it is compared to a broader baseline. Which leads me to the second problem. There is no logical progression to her skill level. Of course, a character's core developments do not require a growth arc, but Ahsoka's story is meant to be one of an inexperienced and immature Padawan growing in both character and skill. Yet her major abilities do not have any proper growth. Now, I don't have much knowledge of fight choreography or an interest in tallying hits. When I analyze fights, I take basic power scaling into consideration, but I'm mainly thinking about the writing. What do the characters want or not want as an outcome? How well do they achieve their goals? And looking at the more significant examples of Ahsoka's solo fights, here's what we find. In Season 1, as a 14-year-old still fresh on the battlefield, she faces renowned Jedi killers Grievous and Ventress. And while there are moments where she gets knocked down, disarmed, and/or runs away, she certainly doesn't lose the fights. Against Grievous, she's able to protect her allies and has room to be cocky while doing it.
Sorry to interrupt your playtime, Grumpy, but wouldn't you prefer a challenge?
She diverts his focus, enabling the success of their mission, and leaves their confrontations completely unharmed, which for a Padawan against him is quite the feat, especially when he had her dead to rights at one point. Ultimately, given that his goals were to defend the listening outpost and kill her, she gets a resounding win against him. As for Ventress, again, Ahsoka shouldn't stand a chance against this assassin, but she's got room to be cocky.
Skywalker's not here to save you now.
Good thing I don't need saving.
And she's again able to protect her allies, leave their confrontations completely unharmed, and successfully prove herself to Luminara.
I should have listened to your advice. Master Skywalker should be proud.
Ahsoka's only failure is not killing Ventress as she wanted.
I'll give you a merciful death.
Meanwhile, Ventress fails to kill Ahsoka, but she does succeed in reclaiming Nute Gunray. However, since the narrative paints that as Luminara's failing, not Ahsoka's,
I've been a fool.
It's okay, Snips. I know you did your best.
I think it's fair to say that the Padawan takes the win again. In Season 2, as I mentioned, she goes up against Bane, several times actually, and in her fights against him, in Cargo of Doom, she wins the first round, although she loses the fight, allowing Bane to achieve his goals.
I'm not impressed.
Mind you, again, this failing is put on someone else, not Ahsoka.
It wasn't your fault, Ahsoka. It was mine. Start to finish.
So overall, I'd say she still comes out on top. In Children of the Force, she loses twice, failing to stop or capture Bane. However, the narrative clearly gives her the win at the end.
Looks like I win. I think I've earned the right to wear this again.
Shortly after that arc, Ahsoka fights Barriss while she's possessed by the Goa'uld. I mean, the Geonosian brainworm. Barriss is still only a Padawan herself, but she's fighting with the determination to kill Ahsoka, while Ahsoka is trying not to harm Barriss, and yet, in terms of actual fighting, the match seems pretty even. It's not until the worm's hold on Barriss is weakened by the cold that Ahsoka is able to win. At the end of the season, Ahsoka faces Aurra Sing. While their moments of actual fighting are very brief, Ahsoka holds her own against Aurra's double pistol barrage until Plo Koon interrupts. And in the end, she gets a clear win, once again deflecting her fire and ultimately leaving Aurra for dead after damaging her ship. Near the beginning of Season 3, Ahsoka faces Aurra Sing again, but this time she's got no one to bail her out of the double pistol barrage and she loses. Padme is left having to defend herself. And at the end of the season, as I mentioned before, Ahsoka goes up against some Trandoshans. And while she soundly loses her first confrontation with one of them, she ends up winning against their leader a day or so later. In Season 4, other than when she bests a Zygerian slaver off screen, she fights several Death Watch warriors. Being unarmed at first, she quickly loses against them as a group. But then reunited with her sabers, she fights the leader, Pre Vizsla, and successfully secures an escape, which is to say, she wins. Though even as they run, she has to fight another warrior who disarms her, and then the second in command, Bo-Katan, who knocks her off the speeder. Since it's only due to timely interference by R2 and Lux that Ahsoka is able to get rid of either of them, it seems more accurate to say she loses there. In Season 5, she has a short fight with Hondo, but she's holding back.
I don't want to hurt you, Hondo.
So instead of overpowering him, she utilizes an open airlock to evict him and his men from the ship. Ultimately, it's another win-lose situation because although she gets them off the ship, she ends up getting bested off-screen and imprisoned. Soon after, she faces Grievous again, after approximately 2 years in-universe, and it plays out basically the same as in Season 1. She gets thrown around a bit, but generally she holds her own against him and successfully achieves her primary goals, protecting her allies and getting away unscathed, while Grievous fails at all of his. So even though she does have to run away, she gets another resounding win against him. Near the end of Season 5, she's immediately bested in a surprise attack from Ventress, and then at the end of the same episode, she gets soundly thrashed by Barriss. In Season 7, after having been out of practice for a while, she fights Maul, and it's little different from her Season 1 encounter with Grievous. She acts cocky.
You're lucky Anakin didn't show up. The way you're fighting, you wouldn't have lasted long.
Holds her own, comes out unscathed, and ultimately succeeds in capturing him, thus protecting her allies, despite the fact that Maul had her dead to rights at one point. And his capture, of course, means he's prevented from achieving any of his goals in their fight, leaving Ahsoka as the clear winner. Finally, Ahsoka's last significant fight is the fight for her life against the clones carrying out Order 66. Despite being completely surrounded, Ahsoka manages to hold her own against the prolonged assault, protect her ally, and get away totally unscathed. While she achieves all of her primary goals, the clones don't even make it out with their lives, giving her another resounding win. Now, with the rich history of Star Wars, we have a pretty good idea of how strong these opponents are. And here I've ranked them according to how difficult we'd expect them to be in a one-on-one against a Jedi Padawan. One or two of these entries could perhaps be swapped, but overall, I think it's a reasonable listing. And yet with Ahsoka, we don't see that hierarchy matched. A dozen experienced soldiers firing at her from all directions are less effective against her than a single bounty hunter. Grievous is a joke compared to the Trandoshans. Instead of taking on successively stronger opponents, she's going one-on-one with some of the toughest enemies right from the start without losing. But then she fights someone weaker than them and fails. Even enemies she has a rematch with later, we don't see her losing, training, and then winning when they meet again. Instead, either nothing changes or she ends up doing worse than she did before. It seems that over the course of the series, her development and growth are not really considered that much, but rather more so what is needed for a little suspense and the progression of that particular plot. This is further evident when we note that, aside from a few passing comments, her training is mainly left up to inference. The best example of this is in Season 3, when she goes from having one lightsaber to having two lightsabers in the space between episodes. We don't ever see her learning to dual wield, she just does now. Without seeing her learning and practicing, we miss out on the satisfaction of watching her putting in effort to improve and then reaping the rewards of that effort. We're missing out on that rich interplay between development and growth. And thus far, I've only been talking about her general combat skills. When it comes to the Force, we see more of the same. Her success, and whether she even tries using it or not, again seems to depend on what the plot wants. In Season 2, Episode 3, she uses the Force to sense the location of the kidnapped children.
This way.
Later, in Season 2, Episode 11, Sunube teaches her how to locate people using her senses.
You need to be more quiet, young one.
You mean if I relax, I can sense Banamu's anxiety?
Yes.
But then further on, in Season 3, Episode 4, she tells Senator Chuchi that she can't use her senses to locate someone.
Can't you sense where they are? Isn't that something you Jedi can do?
It's not something I can just turn on or off.
Even though it's both in episodic and chronological order, it doesn't make any sense. In Season 3, Episode 7, we see her going from not even understanding that she's having visions to being able to have them at will, without any instruction or struggle.
What do you see?
So while I grant that there is a progression over a single episode, it's not a logical one, and she never uses that skill again. In Season 3, The Academy, she tries to mind trick the prison guards, but then, chronologically after, in a Sphere of Influence, she tells Chuchi that she's never done a mind trick before, she's just been practicing.
Have you done this before?
No, but I've been practicing.
Which of course we haven't seen. And then we never see her use a mind trick again until Season 7, when she uses it on one of the Pikes. You could argue there's a bit of progression here, since she fails and then succeeds with a bit of a hiccup and then succeeds. But A, her failure with the Mandalorian guards wasn't presented as being due to a lack of skill. It was that the guards had been trained to resist mind tricks. B, her success with the Pike is ultimately ineffective due to her not factoring in the presence of his companions, something that training, practice would have taught her to be wary of. And then we never see it used again until 4 seasons later, plus the fact that we never actually see her practice. Well, it's just horribly utilized by both character and story. Overall, the development of her abilities is terribly handled. Throughout the series, the level of capability she has is constantly changing, so that she awkwardly hovers in this zone of being just as proficient as she needs to be to eventually overcome the obstacles in front of her, and lacking just as much as is necessary to provide adequate suspense or allow the plot to happen, even if it contradicts or ignores previous development. and that's a big problem. But let's move on to personality. Again, as discussed in part 1, whether you like it or not, personality is mainly implicitly presented, shown through the character's behavior. And because actions speak louder than words, if what they say does not match what they do, then you either have great subtext or a big problem. Connected to this, a character's moral ethics will affect their behavior. Thus, what they believe can often be extrapolated from watching how they behave, that is, their displayed personality. A character's core personality needs to be reasonably consistent, but that doesn't mean that a character always acts the same way. Their dominant traits can complement and/or contrast, but not contradict. The interactions between the dominant traits are what give the character dimension and definition. Ultimately, a character's core personality is not a prison, but without boundaries to contain them, they'll just fall apart. Anyway, let's again take a look at our two leading ladies and see what we can discern about who they are based on how we see them behave. And since we have a general understanding of what the creator's intentions were for the characters, we can compare to that to see how well their personalities were developed. Beginning again with Katara, I think it's fair to say that she is practical.
Remember the reason we're here.
Oh, right. Time to practice waterbending.
Headstrong.
Tell me where he is, and I won't hurt you or your brother.
Go jump in the river.
And idealistic.
But I believe Aang can save the world.
And as already mentioned, she's maternal, which I believe is actually an offshoot trait of her being compassionate. She cares for both the physical and emotional needs of not just her friends, but others as well, even though she may not get anything beneficial in return. But she's not immune to her youth. She can be petty with her brother. She gets jealous of Aang's talent, which leads to trouble. She gets swept up in a crush on Jet, allowing herself to be manipulated. Wanting to appear fun, she goes against her better judgment to pull a scam with Toph, which lands them all in danger. The list goes on. She also has a very serious side. When it comes to those who Katara views as an antagonist, she can be quick to deal out harsh judgment and little sympathy. She carries no regret for stealing the waterbending scroll. After hearing that the elderly man Jet attacked was Fire Nation, even before he lies about that man being an assassin, her response implies that she's immediately willing to accept his treatment of that man as justified. She leaves two boys strung up sideways in ice. She coldly threatens to end Zuko's life. And she was even on the cusp of killing an unarmed old man. Although these are unflattering moments for her, they are not damaging her development. They are not out of line with her character. Katara was born into a world at war, and all her life has suffered from the consequences of it. And I'm not just referring to the loss of her mother, or even her father, who left to fight a couple years before the series begins, but the fact that she was raised among a people who are a shadow of what they once were. They are almost extinct. Their culture is dying because of the oppression of the Fire Nation. And so it makes sense that she becomes more hostile when fighting the Fire Nation, whether directly or indirectly, by protecting Aang or ensuring he can learn more bending, helping other rebels, etc. Even though it seems out of step with her predominantly compassionate nature, it stems from a desire for justice, which, rather than being contrary to compassion, is really just the opposite side of the same coin. To be compassionate to the oppressed, she must also bring justice to their oppressors. It's an offshoot trait, a secondary expression of a primary attribute. And as I already mentioned in the section discussing her extra development, this mentality she has toward the Fire Nation does gain nuance over the course of the series, giving Katara's character some personality growth. Overall, I believe it is a well-reasoned general consensus that Katara has mostly good qualities, as one would expect in context of her role in the story and the target audience. But part of what gives those characteristics dimension is when we get to see firsthand that too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Her positive traits are flaws also, met with appreciation and annoyance from both friend and foe depending on the situation. Her good traits help her and get her into trouble. As just a few examples, her practical approach leads to arguing between her and Sokka in the Great Divide. But that same aspect helps her get the group through being stranded in the desert. Her maternal tendencies, while helpful, can get overbearing.
She's pretty much a pain. She's always always gotta be right about everything, and she gets all bossy and involved and in your business.
She ends up getting on Toph's nerves in the chase and the runaway, leading to conflict within the group, which weakens them to external threats that the group must escape together.
Maybe if you helped out earlier, we could have set up our camp faster and gotten some sleep. And then maybe we wouldn't be in this situation.
You're blaming me for this? I'm out of here.
How you doing?
Well, you know.
Thanks, Appa. I don't know what we'd do without you.
Enemies and traitors, all working together.
I'm gonna turn you in and collect a reward. I can't believe I was so stupid.
Her headstrong nature inspires the earthbending prisoners in Imprisoned, but due to that escapade, she loses her mother's necklace for almost half a season. And in The Waterbending Master, her being headstrong threatens Aang's goal of learning from Pakku, when he takes offense at them disregarding his cultural norms. And it leads to her getting her butt kicked.
You have disrespected me, my teachings, and my entire culture. You are no longer welcome as my student.
I suspect he might change his mind if you swallow your pride and apologize to him.
No. No way am I apologizing to a sour old man like you! Come back here, I'm not finished yet!
Yes, you are.
Lastly, her idealistic stance, while appreciated by the equally optimistic Aang, comes off as a little much to almost everyone else, as hilariously shown in the Ember Island players.
We cannot give up hope, for hope is all we have, and we must never relinquish it, even to our dying breath.
But it gets her into real trouble as well, several times in fact. She tends to trust quickly, and it leads to her getting stabbed in the back by Jet, Zuko, and Hama the Bloodbender.
You lied to me! You're sick and I trusted you! I thought you had changed! Stop! Please!
And while Sokka saves the day by foiling Jet's plan in Season 1, the finale of Season 2 leaves all of Team Avatar reeling from a devastating loss against Zuko and Azula. And although Katara defeats Hama in Season 3, she's forced to use bloodbending to do it, making it a moral loss for her. I want to emphasize that Katara struggles through these scenarios. Most of the time, she's not able to get out of them on her own, and even though the obstacles are overcome, sometimes there's still some sort of loss, either for her personally or as part of the group. The point is, there are meaningful consequences for her behavior, which gives weight to what I'm saying about her positive traits also having a negative side. Overall, it's clear who Katara is, but that doesn't mean she's easy to distill. She has a lot of aspects to her character that complement and contrast each other, giving her dimension. The key is that her core remains consistent. As I said, we see that she is compassionate, idealistic, headstrong, and practical. Others have used different descriptors for her core, but I think it's fair to assert that what I've described is in line with what the creators were going for, making her personality yet another area of well-executed development. Now let's look at Ahsoka. Before I begin, I may as well address the elephant in the room. Alibi and myself have spent a lot of time tearing Ahsoka's personality to shreds. We've made extensive video series detailing her unsavory behavior, her lack of growth, and her Mary Sue qualities. And the existence of this video series should be evidence enough that we're not done yet. But this case study is a bit different, because I'm not just analyzing Ahsoka alone through a full death of the author lens. I am analyzing and critiquing her and Katara, and I'm taking into some account the narrative surrounding them. It has been my goal throughout this study to evaluate the girls equally rather than favoring one over the other. You may have your own opinions on how well I have done so, but I have sincerely been trying my best to be as gracious as possible toward Ahsoka and critical of Katara where warranted, and I will continue to do that through this section as well. All that being the case, I feel it unnecessary for me to discuss Ahsoka's negative character traits in much detail here. Suffice to say, people generally agree that there is plenty of evidence of her being bratty, cocky, aggressive, reckless, and impulsive, though her fanbase claims that she grows out of those things. If you haven't already seen our case study on her character growth and are interested in checking it out, we'll leave a link to the introduction video in the description. The most I will say about her negative traits here is that a character's backstory should be a big influence on who they are. That's just logical. But even though Ahsoka's been raised by a disciplined community of peacekeeping monks since she was 3 years old, instead of doing her best to demonstrate humility, respect, and self-discipline, she behaves like what I guess the TCW creators thought their target audience would find relatable. A spoiled teenager, entitled, disrespectful, aggressive, self-centered, etc. It doesn't seem like the creators took into consideration how these prominent negative personality traits are entirely antithetical to her backstory. They were more concerned with making her marketable, leaving us with some very contradictory development right off the bat, which is never given an explanation. Not a good start, but she's still got a chance to show us something better. So in terms of her positive personality traits, Ahsoka is generally considered to be fearless, friendly, loyal, honest, kind-hearted, and selfless. And there's simply no denying that is how the narrative intends her to be viewed. And thus there are moments where we see behavior from Ahsoka that fits that narrative. But as I said in part 1, development builds. And unfortunately, it seems like it's more of an enemy to Ahsoka than a friend. Let's first talk about some examples where I think it's fair to say she's considered to be acting friendly or kind-hearted. Season 1, Episode 2, Rising Malevolence. After receiving a distress call from Plo Koon's fleet, Ahsoka wastes no time in expressing a desire to lend help.
You heard Master Plo. He needs our support. We have to go help him.
And even though it breaks Jedi protocol, she interrupts the Council to assert her belief that they can't give up on him.
Just because there haven't been any survivors before doesn't mean there won't be any this time.
And certainly the narrative wants us to believe Ahsoka's behavior in this episode is admirable.
Through it all, you never gave up. You did a great job.
But upon looking closer, we noticed something. While the narrative would like us to believe that she cares about everyone...
Thanks for getting us out of there in one piece, General Skywalker.
You have my Padawan to thank for that. She always said you guys would pull through.
General Plo said someone would come for us. We're glad he was right.
Ahsoka only cares about Plo Koon.
We have to go help him. If anyone could survive, Master Plo could.
Now he's lost, so I thought maybe I could find him.
We have to stay.
Ahsoka, I want to believe Master Plo's alive, but
I know he's alive! Are you okay, Master Plo?
Not once does she show concern for anyone other than him. To be clear, that's not inherently a bad thing. Sure, it puts a damper on how kind-hearted she appears in a broader sense, but there's nothing wrong with having a character who prioritizes their personal connections. Heck, Anakin certainly does. The problem is that it contradicts what the narrative is trying to present, making it poor development. Season 1, Episode 6, Downfall of a Droid. Though Anakin is unhappy about being partnered with the new droid, Ahsoka welcomes it with open arms. She extends patience and encouragement.
Don't worry, Goldie. You'll get to know him later.
And even defends the little R3 unit from others with less tolerance for its mistakes.
I'm sure he did his best.
Which sounds great, until it puts Anakin's life in danger and she reprimands him for complaining about it.
I think I'm lucky to be alive.
Great! Now you hurt his feelings.
Consider how just 4 episodes ago she was so passionate about the life of her friend. So doesn't it seem a little out of character for her to now prioritize the feelings of a droid she hardly knows over the life of her friend? Yes, her treatment of the droid makes her seem friendly, but then the way she treats her actual friend completely negates that. And yes, I understand that the narrative is ultimately trying to show that she's naive, but by taking it too far, they end up fumbling her development as friendly. Season 2, Episode 11, Lightsaber Lost. After learning that her lightsaber has fallen into violent hands, Ahsoka somberly ponders her responsibility in the matter.
It's in the hands of a killer. This is exactly what I was afraid of.
You worry that if people die at the hands of your lightsaber, that you will be as guilty for their death as the one that strikes the blow.
But let's back up just a minute.
My lightsaber, you slimy thief. I want it back. Now! You little...
Ahsoka!
It's not smart to steal from a Jedi.
You're looking a little too young to be a Jedi.
Well, that's awkward. Keep in mind that Banamu is cornered, unarmed, and injured. Yeah, he's a pickpocket, but it's not like she's bringing him to justice. She's using her power to intimidate, threaten, and abuse him just to make a point. She is effectively behaving like the kind of person that she doesn't want wielding her lightsaber. But the narrative doesn't want you to think about that. This is what you're supposed to remember.
I'll trade myself for them.
But character development doesn't cherry-pick highlights. Everything stacks, and it's stacking up like a mess. Season 3, Episode 6, The Academy. In a nutshell, Ahsoka is assigned to teach a class about corruption, and when some of the students begin taking her lessons to heart, she steps in to help them out. Good, right? I guess. If you ignore how insulted she was over receiving the assignment.
Don't you think I'm just a little overqualified for this?
And then her lecturing the students about how they should investigate everything and everyone involved before they act on the information they have.
Examine all of the facts and all of the people involved before you act.
Right before she acts on the information that they give her without investigating anything or anyone involved. Which leaves her reeking of rules for thee but not for me hypocrisy. And then she barrels ahead without much of a plan and gets upset at the kids when they realize she's managed to achieve nothing besides getting them thrown into prison.
Have you found my aunt?
Not exactly, but I know they have her in custody.
Where?
The Prime Minister wouldn't tell me.
I knew this plan wouldn't work.
Have a little faith.
And then she lies to them, which I'll explain later. But yeah, suffice to say, yet another episode that's supposed to make Ahsoka look good isn't doing a very good job. Season 4, Zagirian Slavers arc. In an effort to locate and rescue her people, Ahsoka goes undercover as a slave and ultimately is hailed as the real hero for her contributions to their mission.
Ahsoka is the real hero.
But the thing is, Ahsoka does not play her part willingly.
Remind me why I'm the one playing the part of the slave?
And coming on the heels of having just learned about Anakin's traumatic past as a slave.
As a child, Anakin and his mother were sold into slavery by the Hutt clans.
Her complaints come off as terribly insensitive, made worse by her mocking Anakin when he tries to mask his trauma with humor.
Remind me why I'm the one playing the part of the slave?
I tried it once. I wasn't any good at it. Besides, the role of master comes easily to me.
Really? Well, this time try to be convincing at it.
Not exactly a very kind-hearted act. Not to mention, her unwillingness to play the part of a slave leaks into her behavior elsewhere, to the extent that she could jeopardize the mission, except that Anakin covers for her.
You don't want to do that. Don't you dare touch me.
Yeah, she's sticking it to the slavers, but what about the people they're trying to rescue? And speaking of them, near the end of the arc, when Anakin mentions that they and all the slaves will be escaping the mining facility, Ahsoka comments,
"We'll need a bigger ship."
Which is just so confusing because it implies that she was not already considering that they were there to rescue everyone. And it's just not a good look after the narrative has been trying to push this idea of how much she cares about her people.
Those are my people. I'm gonna go help my people.
Season 4, Episode 14, A Friend in Need. Although she's currently in a bit of a pickle herself, Ahsoka takes time to gently inquire about the captured girls and their situation.
What's your name? Where are you from?
As usual, this seems really friendly and kind of her. But if you back up to mere seconds before this moment, she's insensitive toward their fear, making flippant remarks that probably scare the girls even more.
Try that again and I will—
Shh! You don't want to make them angry. They are far from rational.
Believe me, you have no idea. What's your name?
It's such an awkward switch between her aggressive disgust toward the Death Watch and laughing off their oppression, even though the abused girls in front of her are terrified, and then switching to being sweetly sympathetic toward the girls. And this is actually a perfect example of what I think is a running issue throughout the series that shoots her friendly and kind characterization in the foot. She spends so much time wrapped up in a righteously negative attitude toward her enemies and even her allies on many occasions.
These farmers are in trouble. Why can't we help them?
How can you admire such a horrible place?
Careful not to choke on your stupidity.
That's not fair.
I'm not trying to be.
That overall, she doesn't seem like a very nice or approachable person. And as I mentioned already, her character design itself, the sharp features and resting beach face, doesn't help alleviate that problem. Add to that the numerous examples of when Ahsoka is insensitive toward or outright mistreats her allies, and we've got a significant development issue. I would expect a friendly and kind-hearted character to act that way with reasonable consistency, especially toward her allies, but far too often we see the opposite. However, that's just one aspect of her personality. There are other positive sides to her that are better developed, right? What about her being fearless? In the final arc of Season 3, Anakin and Plo Koon discuss Ahsoka, saying,
"What is Ahsoka's strength?"
"She is fearless."
"That can also be a weakness."
So I would expect to see something similar to what I discussed with Katara, where there is this balance of a good trait also being a source of conflict, getting her into meaningful trouble. But instead, within the first half of Season 1, as I noted before, Ahsoka engages both Grievous and Ventress by herself without fear.
Wouldn't you prefer a challenge? Good thing I don't need saving!
But this cocky attitude doesn't get her in any trouble. She's victorious in both episodes and receives praise for her contributions against Ventress.
Master Skywalker should be proud.
In her last episode of Season 1 and her first episode of Season 2, Ahsoka is leading her own squadron of troops and she obstinately refuses to follow Anakin's orders, instead charging ahead with blind confidence. But both times the narrative insists that the devastating consequences of her actions are not her fault.
It was a trap, Snips. It wasn't your fault. Masters, this incident is my responsibility.
And both episodes end with Ahsoka saving the day. In the first arc of Season 2, she goes up against Bane repeatedly, choosing and even specifically requesting to face him solo.
Ahsoka, wait! We'll take him together!
Let me take the lead, Master. I've got a score to settle.
But the narrative foists the blame on Anakin for everything that goes poorly and eventually gives Ahsoka the win.
It wasn't your fault, Ahsoka. It was mine, start to finish.
Looks like I win.
Later in Season 2, Ahsoka defiantly argues with Anakin to allow her to go on what he believes to be a suicide mission. Her argument being that
I've had riskier assignments,
and thus she is confident she can handle this one as well. Although she does end up getting temporarily trapped, the narrative is critical of Anakin's overprotective behavior rather than the determined recklessness which led her there. In fact, it's Ahsoka's casual confidence in the face of imminent death that saves the two girls, which the narrative makes sure to point out.
Padawan, you did well.
Thank you, Master. But if it weren't for Ahsoka, we'd still be down there.
But then, awkwardly, in Season 5, the narrative tries to walk that back, having Ahsoka recount the event as an emotional struggle.
like when we were stuck inside the battle tank on Geonosis. It was hard not to be afraid.
Despite us having seen no evidence of such fear in that moment.
We'll run out of air long before we starve.
In Season 3, Ahsoka fearlessly escorts others into enemy territory by herself multiple times. First, she requests to help Senator Chuchi in Episode 4, then she takes charge of the Mandalore students in Episode 6, and she smuggles Padme to Raxus in Episode 10. But in Episode 7, Ahsoka quietly admits to Padme,
I've been mostly unsure about my abilities on my own. Usually Master Skywalker is there to guide me.
wait, when have we seen that uncertainty, or a reliance on Anakin directing her? Since Season 1, she's been perfectly confident on her own, even requesting to go solo and defying Anakin on multiple occasions. Later in this season, it happens again. She's eager to come along on a dangerous mission, and she argues with Anakin when he wants her to stay behind, even implying he's being a bad teacher. Ultimately, she disobeys him and inserts herself into the mission anyway. and lies about it too. But instead of this getting her into trouble, the narrative shifts the fault to Anakin.
If there's one thing I've learned from you, Master, it's that following direct orders isn't always the best way to solve a problem.
Doubling down on him being a bad teacher.
I see Anakin's new teaching method is to do as I say, not as I do.
And fully supports Ahsoka's actions by making her the key to the mission's success and sparing her from any consequences for her insubordination and deception.
They're ventilation ducts, but they're far too small for us to gain access.
Too small for you, maybe.
She's right. I need you to lead the group.
I guess it's a good thing I came along after all.
Whether you were meant to be on this mission or not, you are now the most important part of it.
Did you assign Ahsoka to the mission?
It appears I did.
As I said earlier, in the final arc of Season 3, the narrative uses Anakin to describe Ahsoka as fearless, and it tries to pretend that this trait has some negative impact on her as well. But even in that arc, it's Ahsoka's confidence in the face of imminent death that inspires the younglings to fight for their lives and eventually escape.
I was able to lead others to survive as well.
But then, in the first arc of Season 4, Ahsoka and Princely Char have this exchange.
Aren't you scared?
I used to be. All the time. Until I realized that if you make decisions out of fear, you're more likely to be wrong.
So, a mere 3 episodes ago, we were told
she is fearless.
But now she's saying she was scared all the time. Until she decided not to be at some vague point in time. Since we haven't seen evidence of her being scared all the time, I guess this decision happened before she ever appeared on screen. Not great development. And then the Season 5 finale arc rolls around. And even though it seems like she's making decisions out of fear,
I don't know who to trust.
The narrative insists that her actions are courageous. And so, not surprisingly, at the end of the arc, her choices are praised to the extent that it's implied the Council offers her knighthood.
You have shown such great strength and resilience in your struggle to prove your innocence.
This is the true sign of a Jedi Knight.
I could pull more examples, but I hope you've gotten the point by now. Although we are told, halfway through the series, that Ahsoka's fearlessness can also be a weakness, we don't ever get to see it cause any meaningful problems for her. Each time something goes wrong, the narrative reframes the issue as not her fault, or a good thing actually. And while I wish I could at least give TCW points for consistently presenting her as fearless, the creators throw that option out the window too by having her make contradictory claims about having supposedly often been afraid. They make a similar mistake with her loyalty too. She's fully loyal to the Republic, which the narrative supports because the alternative, the Separatists, are shown to be pure evil, always, every time. But then, halfway through the series, the narrative tries to act like, oh wait, this blind loyalty is a bad thing actually. And they have a single episode where Ahsoka allegedly learns
the politics of this war are not as black and white as I once thought they were.
And yet she continues to remain fully loyal to the Republic after that episode, which the narrative rewards because they continue to portray the Separatists as pure evil, always. Every time. And the trend I've mentioned here, the narrative always supporting Ahsoka's behavior, creates another problem too. When she doesn't face setbacks, she doesn't grow. The creators could have used these character traits to add so much richness to her, but it all goes to waste. However, there's still more of her good traits to discuss. So let's continue. Ahsoka is said to be selfless, and if we look at the broader context of TCW, she appears to fit the bill rather well on that one. In every mission, every battle, she's on the front lines. She's risking her life for the greater good without getting any benefit in return, right? I'll get back to that in a minute. But first, let's narrow the context down to more personal examples. Specific episodes where Ahsoka is narratively framed as being concerned with helping others. But in keeping with the trend thus far, closer inspection suggests it's not what it seems. Season 1, Episode 9, Cloak of Darkness. The narrative would have us believe that when Ahsoka leaves her post to join Luminara against Ventress, that she does so because she understands how formidable Ventress is and she's concerned for Luminara and wants to help stop the bad guy.
Master,
all due respect, but Ventress is too powerful for any one Jedi to fight alone. Let me help you.
But the episode opens with Ahsoka complaining about how their trip has been boring.
Finally, it's been such a boring trip.
Which we can reasonably infer means it's been peaceful. When Luminara is interrogating Gunray, Ahsoka is impatient with her methods and decides to interrupt with a more sensational bad cop routine.
Tell us what we want to know right now, or I will gut you like a Rokarian dirtfish.
And when Ventress shows up, Ahsoka seems almost gleeful.
Tell you what, I'll give you a merciful death.
It's after all of this that Ahsoka tells Luminara to let her help, and then disobeys her orders to stay behind and joins the fight anyway. So it begs the question, was her concern really about helping Luminara and stopping the bad guy? Or perhaps was she just looking for some action? The narrative suggests the former answer, the development suggests the latter. Season 3, Episode 7, Assassin. At the beginning of the episode, Ahsoka is disappointed with being left out of the mission to Baelith. She tries getting Anakin to take her along against the Council's orders, claiming,
"If I'm not with you, who else will have your back?"
Which, yeah, makes it seem like she's concerned about him. But as I mentioned earlier, shortly after he tells her to stay behind, we see her griping.
I should be out there fighting, not in here studying.
So was she really worried about him? Or was she just looking to be part of the action on a new planet? Honestly, that single line practically destroys Ahsoka's selfless characterization. It frames everything before and after it in a new light. She wants to be fighting. She enjoys it. That's literally why it was a punishment for her to be put on Temple Archive guard duty in the beginning of Season 2.
I think she needs some time away from the battlefield.
On Archive security. Reflect on your actions, you can, Padawan.
Guard duty?
And because she gets a thrill from the action, any argument that claims she's going into danger for selfless reasons is immediately standing on shaky ground. As I noted earlier, at the end of the arc, Ahsoka expresses how she led others to survive the Trandoshan hunt.
I was able to lead others to survive as well.
But what we actually saw was, without taking the time to fully assess the situation, she was immediately pressuring the younglings to abandon their survival tactics and go on the offensive.
We could have stopped them.
No, Ahsoka. We're not saviors here. Here, we're survivors.
We'll never get out of here if we just keep hiding. We have to act.
This reckless approach resulted in the group being caught in a vulnerable position when the hunters attacked, and Khalifa lost her life because of it. But instead of reconsidering her tactics, Ahsoka doubled down, insisting they go kamikaze.
I say we go down with a fight.
She completely disregarded the experience and safety of the others in her aggressive escape attempts. I could understand calling her behavior desperate, though as already mentioned, the narrative frames it as fearless and strong.
Your strength, it's what we've been lacking.
But it doesn't seem very selfless. Season 4, Episode 14, A Friend in Need. As the title of the episode suggests, Ahsoka is just helping out a friend in need, right? Once she has Lux on her ship, she tries to take him against his will to Coruscant, disarming and threatening him when he tries to assert that he doesn't want to go.
I can't go with you, Ahsoka.
I'm sorry, but I'm taking you to Coruscant.
She completely disrespects his personal autonomy. Then when he succeeds in getting control and pursuing his original plan, Ahsoka tags along, making sure to berate and insult him every chance she gets.
What have you gotten us into? Plan? What plan? You don't know what you're doing.
Careful not to choke on your stupidity.
She's constantly pitting her will against his, treating him as inferior. In the end, she disregards his safety by blowing her "I'm his betrothed" ruse.
I'm his betrothed.
And then tries again to take him to Coruscant despite his protests. Regardless whether you accept or reject the narrative that Lux needed help, do Ahsoka's actions here really come off as selfless? Season 5, Onderon Arc. When the general is prepared to sacrifice himself for the rebel cause, Ahsoka can't just stand by and watch him get executed. Even though it goes against the Council's orders not to interfere, Ahsoka rushes in to make sure that everyone gets away safely. Or at least that's how how the narrative wants you to view the moment, but afterwards they give her this exchange.
I knew you couldn't resist a good fight.
Am I becoming that predictable?
And based on what we've seen before from Ahsoka,
I should be out there fighting.
Well, as I said, development stacks. Season 7, the Martez sister arc. Ahsoka claims to be coming along solely for the sisters' benefit.
I don't have an angle, unless maybe to keep you both out of trouble.
But again, when we look at her behavior, because she doesn't want to run into her old allies, she first suggests they ignore, and then she hangs up on the military, making their ship look suspicious, right after telling Trace not to do that.
Don't do anything that makes us look suspicious. Don't answer that.
When they meet the contact for the job, she insinuates accusations of criminal activity.
Many things can be made out of spice, and they're not all good.
Which threatens the girls' chances of getting work they so desperately need. She then intimidates, confuses, and lies to Trace.
I'm starting to see why Rafa didn't originally hire you for this job. It's dangerous. Think of all the good you could do if we deliver the spice to someplace else instead of the Pikes. They'll take your ship, your life, everything.
Causing Trace to panic and dump the spice.
No one is taking my ship!
After which, Ahsoka immediately turns on her.
Of all the choices you could make, that is literally the worst one.
I can't believe this, but I agree with her.
Once the sisters are divided and afraid, Ahsoka uses the problem she created to put herself in charge. But she won't share with the sisters the truth of her knowledge and abilities. So when they tell her she has a bad plan, she responds by being condescending and dodging the issue.
It is a pretty bad plan.
I'm sorry, did either of you have a better one? Sounds like my plan is the best one we got.
That's not really addressing whether or not it's gonna work.
When her terrible plan fails, she resorts to blaming Rafa and treating her as morally inferior.
We wouldn't be here if you hadn't taken the job with the Pikes. You can't profit from other people's suffering, or at least I won't let you.
And because Ahsoka still doesn't want the girls to know she had been a Jedi, she allows both girls to be taken to be tortured instead of using the Force to prevent that and help them escape the Pike prison. She's repeatedly prioritizing her own emotional comfort over the sisters' safety and well-being, but the narrative frames her behavior as what the Jedi should be.
You might not think of yourself as a Jedi, but you act like one. Or at least how I want them to be.
She's right.
A selfless act is one that excludes self-centered agenda. If someone is offering to help only when they'll get something out of it, or if helping means that they're constantly trying to take control of the person or situation to achieve their goals, that's not being selfless. At best, one must admit that Ahsoka's selfless characterization is terribly developed due to conflicting information. At worst, one could argue that with the development we see stacking over and over, Ahsoka is, in fact, a very self-centered character. As for her being honest, well, first consider what makes a person honest. I think it's accurate to say that honesty is not simply a matter of stating facts. Telling someone that their car has been dented isn't necessarily honest, it may just be factual. But if you caused the dent and you are forthright with that information, that is honesty. Whereas if you omit your involvement, even though saying your car got dented is still factual, you're being dishonest because you're concealing relevant information. So being an honest person is about being a reliable source of the truth, the whole truth, particularly when it does not benefit you or may even hinder you. Now, certainly Ahsoka is generally factual, but honest, well... Season 2, Episode 1, Holocron Heist. After deliberately disobeying Obi-Wan's orders to retreat on Felucia, instead of taking responsibility for her behavior, Ahsoka tells the Council,
I wasn't being disobedient.
Which is a blatant lie. Season 2, Episode 11, Lightsaber Lost. Ahsoka lies to Anakin to cover up the loss of her lightsaber.
Where were you?
I was checking out a suspect. I had a bad feeling about him.
Even when an elder Jedi encourages her to come clean, she refuses, because she doesn't want to get scolded.
I'm sure if you explain your loss to your master, he'll understand.
No.
Season 3, Episode 6, The Academy. When Ahsoka's half-baked plan to discover where Satine is being kept inevitably fails, and the students end up stuck in prison, one of them complains about the failure, and Ahsoka suddenly claims to have a plan B, but she suspiciously won't tell them anything about it except that it involves them.
I'll find her. We'll just modify the plan a bit.
How are you going to do that?
Don't worry. You'll know when to act when I give the signal.
What's the signal?
You'll know it when you see it.
However, since the kids only get involved because Ahsoka's solo attempt fails and Almec is stupid, bringing in all the students so he can torture just one of them, it seems pretty clear that Ahsoka was lying to them so she wouldn't look bad for screwing up. Season 3, Episode 4, Sphere of Influence. As I mentioned before, Ahsoka lies to her good friend, Senator Rio Chuchi, more than once. First when she claims,
Senator Amidala sent me to help if I can.
Even though she specially requested permission from Anakin to get involved. She lies again when she tells Chuchi that she can't use her Jedi senses to search for people, even though she previously used them to do just that. In Season 2, Episode 3, and Episode 11, as I said before. Season 3, The Citadel Arc. Ahsoka tags along on the mission against Anakin's orders and blatantly lies, claiming,
I received orders to join the team.
She later admits to Master Peel that she did it just for the thrill of being part of the mission.
I lied just so I could be a part of the mission.
But what does she have to lose by being honest with a dying man? When she has a chance to come clean at the end of the arc, she says nothing.
Did you assign Ahsoka to the mission?
It appears I did.
Season 3, Episode 22, Wookiee Hunt. At the end of the episode, Ahsoka lies to Anakin, claiming,
I was out there, alone.
But that she was
able to lead others to survive as well.
When the reality is that she was not alone. There were others who were already surviving, and they helped her by sharing what little provisions, shelter, and knowledge they had. And ultimately, it was the arrival of the Wookiees, contacted through the efforts of Chewbacca, that saved their skins. But she's completely leaving out all their contributions. Season 5, Onderon Arc. Their mission from the Council is explicitly just to observe, advise, and train the rebels to defend themselves. But when Ahsoka introduces herself, she lies, telling them,
We're here to help you take back your planet.
She also bold-faced lies to Anakin again. She's distracted by her jealousy over Lux being interested in Steela, but she denies it when Anakin asks her about it.
Are you losing focus?
No, Master.
It's only after he's left her in charge that Ahsoka admits that she can't help being distracted.
Remember what I told you about staying focused.
I can't help it, Master.
But by that point, what's done is done. She has nothing to lose. She then lies by omission when she tells Obi-Wan and Anakin,
The Separatists definitely know we're backing the rebels.
Conveniently leaving out the fact that she is directly responsible for the Separatists finding this out. Later, Obi-Wan tells her,
Do not stay there if their failure is certain. Evacuate who you can, and return to Coruscant immediately.
But this is the message Ahsoka relays to Steela.
Is the Republic going to help us?
No.
Another lie of omission, since Obi-Wan just offered Republic help in the form of refuge and relocation. Season 5, Episode 19, To Catch a Jedi. When Ahsoka is trying to persuade Ventress to help her, she first lies about what her situation is, claiming,
We have a lot more in common than you think.
She convinces Ventress that, like Dooku betrayed her, Anakin has betrayed Ahsoka. Even though last she saw him, Anakin was begging her to let him help clear her name.
We have to prove you're innocent. I would never let anyone hurt you, Ahsoka. Never.
Ahsoka then, again, lies when she promises,
If you help me, I'll speak to the Council and the Senate on your behalf. I'll get you a full pardon for your crimes.
In the end, Ventress fully holds up her end of the bargain, but Ahsoka never says so much as a word in her favor to anyone. Season 7, The Martez Arc. Ahsoka tells many lies to the sisters. She lies about her past, omitting her former position as a Jedi, instead claiming to have learned her skills from her older brother and Skywalker Academy.
Where did you learn to fight like that?
My older brother taught me.
That must have been some academy you went to topside. What was it called?
Skywalker Academy.
As well as saying that her knowledge of criminal organizations comes simply from her paying attention to the world.
How do you know about the Pikes?
I pay attention to the world around me.
She scares Trace into dumping the spice by lying about the Pikes, claiming
they'll take your ship, your life, everything.
When they likely would only do that if cheated or double-crossed. She then suggests,
why not make the best of a bad situation and deliver this spice to someplace that can use it for medicine?
But when Trace confronts her about it, she lies, claiming it was just an ethical debate.
Then how was turning the spice into medicine gonna solve anything?
Well, that was more of an ethical debate.
And when Rafa confronts her about convincing Trace to dump the spice, Ahsoka sidesteps, saying that she never told Trace to do that.
We're here because you convinced Trace to dump the spice, and she did.
I never told her to do that.
Which is factual, but it's dishonest because she's denying how what she did say clearly influenced Trace to dump the spice. So on many occasions where Ahsoka would not stand to benefit or would perhaps be hindered by telling the truth, she chooses to lie, either directly or by omission. And there are even occasions where she doesn't seem to gain anything by lying, and yet she still chooses to lie. That doesn't strike me as the behavior of an honest person. Suffice to say, for each of Ahsoka's key positive personality traits, there is a consistent disparity between what the narrative wants us to think and what we actually see. And although the narrative often tries to justify or ignore her contradictory behavior, there's just too much of it. The more you cross-reference TCW with itself, the less coherent her characterization becomes. Anyway, let's move on to the final core character development. Motivations. Once more, as discussed in part 1, core motivations are the meaningful internal and/or external pressures that drive a character's participation in a story by pulling them toward and/or pushing them away from something. Internal motivations can be positively or negatively based. External motivations often appear in the form of a character's goals, and the two are often directly connected with the internal influencing the external. There is crossover between personality, including moral ethics, and motivations. Specifically, a character's personality and/or beliefs will affect their approach to pursuing their goals. Motivations can contradict each other, but the key to making it work is to utilize the clashing motivations to create meaningful conflict for the character. Now let's take a last look at Atla and TCW and see how the core motivations stack up for Katara and Ahsoka. If you were to guess what is the first motivation for Katara, you might think it's her wanting to help Aang, but it's actually more self-centric. After revealing the existence of Katara's waterbending, more development quickly builds on this over the course of the first episode. We learn she lacks confidence in her abilities and she wants to improve, but no one is around to teach her.
You're looking at the only waterbender in the whole South Pole.
And then we learn that not even Aang can really help because not all bending is alike. So in addition to the world building that is happening, by informing us of Katara's interest to learn more waterbending and her inability to do so at home, the creators are establishing a motivation for her to join Aang. After they learn that Aang is the Avatar, the hope for the world, then her goals include helping him. But their journey together starts because of waterbending.
Well, if we go to the North Pole, you can master waterbending. We can learn it together.
And I really like how the creators do that. It helps ease Katara into the journey in a way that is more believable. As the saying goes, every character is the protagonist of their own story. Katara is only 14 years old, and as I said before, she's not immune to her youth. Helping save the world is a lofty goal, but her life in the South Pole is all she has ever known. It would be a wholly selfless act right off the bat for her to completely uproot her life just to act as support for a kid she barely knows. By instead starting her off with the pursuit of a personal goal which she couldn't achieve otherwise, her initial motivation to go along is more characteristically based and thus, as I said, more believable. And then, of course, as the journey progresses, her goal of bringing an end to the war through her support of Aang naturally moves to the forefront. At the end of season 1, she selflessly secures Aang's place as Pakku's student, even though she won't also be taught.
If you won't teach Katara, then...
Then what?
Then I won't learn from you.
You can't risk your training for me. You have to learn from Master Pakku, even if he is a big jerk.
and she had genuinely resigned herself to that deprivation, until Sokka later gives them the idea to have Aang pass the knowledge to her after hours. But speaking of her motivations being character-based, there's a bunch of crossover between Katara's personality and her motivations. Her motherliness drives her to support and look after the others, even though she hardly receives recognition for her efforts. Her compassion compels her to aid the many people in need whom they come across during their travels, enabling her to recognize victims even among the enemy nation. Her headstrong and idealistic nature is the foundation for her belief that Aang can save the world with their help, and thus she is motivated to stick it out with him and keep on fighting, despite that the odds are against them. And as I touched on before, her backstory is a motivator as well. On the broader scale, she wants justice for the oppressed, and she wants the war to end. On a more personal level, she wants revenge against the man who killed her mother. Though in the end, her moral alignment wins out, and she decides to let him go. There are times where Katara's motivations are shallow, such as her hounding the fortune teller for predictions about her love life, or when she goes against her better judgment in an attempt to seem fun.
See, this is exactly why I'm against these scams. I knew this would happen. But this was your idea. I know. I wanted to show you that I'm not so motherly. I wanted to show you that I can have fun too.
There are also times where Katara's motivations are contradictory, such as when she works with Jet in Season 1. Her motivations, as expected, are to help people and fight the Fire Nation. And at first, it seems that aiding Jet will accomplish both. But then, it's revealed that Jet is hurting people in his fight against the Fire Nation, putting her motivations at odds with each other, though she doesn't discover this until it's too late. It's Sokka who must choose how to respond, and he is forced to help the Fire Nation in order to protect innocent people. Overall, Katara's motivations are clear and well-rooted in her characterization. I feel confident saying this is another well-developed aspect of her character. So that brings us back to Ahsoka. Now, similar to Ahsoka's personality, when it comes to her motivations, Alibi and I have some rather unpopular thoughts on the subject. Again, due to how we typically analyze her content through a full death of the author lens. And as I said before, I am doing my best to be more gracious to her character in this case study. But when I got to this section, I found myself struggling. So I searched online to try to find what her fans believe are her motivations, specifically in TCW, of course. And I couldn't find anything. The internet at large seems to have no explanation for what drives Ahsoka in that series. So I guess it's up to me. Now, certainly, I can make reasonable assertions about what the narrative intends her motivations to be. She fights for the Republic because she believes it's the right thing to do. She defends the innocent and helps her friends because she is selfless and kind. She wants to be a good Jedi because the Jedi are her family, etc., etc. I could go on, but it's much easier to summarize with insert typical good guy stuff here. What we're mainly supposed to believe drives her is just vague and generic hero shtick. If we try to extrapolate anything more personal, more rooted in her characterization, we run into problems, because development builds. And Ahsoka's characterization, her personality, isn't well developed enough to be built on. We cannot deduce what her motivations are informed by her personality when we can't even tell what her personality is. We're supposed to excuse her impulsivity and disrespect because she's just an immature teenager. But we're also supposed to believe that she has the emotional maturity to stand on the front lines of a galactic war in service to some grand cause without a thought for her own good. Yet, as I pointed out before, Ahsoka seems to fight for the pleasure of fighting, not for the primary purpose of helping others. She's supposed to be selfless and kind, but more often than not, her behavior toward others is self-centered and callous. So how are we supposed to believe that she has the typical hero goals which are predominantly rooted in selflessness and kindness? She supposedly wants to be a good Jedi, but we don't ever see her training, nor do we really see evidence of her striving to live according to their values. Often we see her preferring to oppose them. Again, I could go on, but Really, there's not much else to say. Other than her aggression motivating her to fight, Ahsoka has nothing specific driving her. Everything else that is intended to be in the narrative is either generic or it falls apart because of inconsistent, lacking, and/or contradictory development. And I can't help but wonder, with only a negatively based motivation to call her own, does Ahsoka really deserve to be considered a positively aligned character? Actually, being so poorly developed in most of her core aspects, does she even deserve to be called a character? In summary, Katara's core character is clearly defined and dynamic. You can tell at a glance what she's like. Her abilities are logically given and utilized well by both the character and the story. Her personality traits are well established, balanced, and rounded out over the course of the series. And her motivations are sensibly based in her characterization. The creators do a splendid job of developing her with accuracy, depth, and consistency, giving her that delightful illusion of personhood. To be clear, I don't think Atla, nor Katara by extension, is flawless, but the character work is pretty solid. Honestly, I cannot recall any major or significantly frequent examples within the show where any core aspect of Katara's characterization is unclear, inconsistent, or contradictory. If you can, feel free to share in the comments for discussion. Ahsoka's core character development is severely lacking. Her design communicates some of her personality traits, but little else. Her abilities and her personality are plagued with inconsistencies, many contradictions, and a lack of depth or progression. And her positively based motivations are vague and generic, leaving her feeling flat. Overall, despite being among the main protagonists of TCW, she's hardly a character and more of a plot device or a Mary Sue, which, as I mentioned, is another case study we've done on her character, so go check that out if you want more explanation. Anyway, let's wrap this series up. What have we learned? Character development, when executed well, creates the illusion that a fictional character has all the depth and complexity of a real person. When it comes to extra development, a little can go a long way. You don't need tons of extra development to make a well-rounded character. It's about making the developments you do include have a worthwhile impact on the character and story, either by emphasizing themes, supporting core character establishment or world building, or utilizing the development to prompt a character arc, etc. That being said, you can effectively include insignificant extra developments, such as for humor, for subtext, or set dressing in a sense. The key is to choose a development with a small area of effect so it doesn't create problems elsewhere in the character or story. When it comes to core development, ultimately the audience needs to be given a firm idea of who your character is, what they are capable of, and what drives them. Each aspect needs to be clearly defined, well balanced, and applied with reasonable consistency to the character and their story. The intended narrative and what the audience is shown need to be in agreement. You can tell the audience something different to create subtext, but otherwise, contradictions or a lack of definition can ruin a character. And that's that. As always, whether you agree or disagree with our character analysis, respectful discussion is welcome in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and perhaps learned something new, please be sure to give us a thumbs up. Subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified of our future content. Share this video with your friends. And please consider becoming a patron to support our channel. Massive thanks to those of you who already have. Stay loud and proud, folks, and I'll see you around.